Alright guys, welcome back to another tech video. In this video, we're going to go ahead and touch on another tech concept that I kind of been alluding to, but I actually meant to make this video already, but I messed around and lost the script. So this is going to be a second chance, like a second take of me doing this. So we're going to talk about IP address classes. And if I didn't already put up the video about subnetting, then I'll make sure to put that video up before I put this one up, because this bounces off of that. So you need to understand subnetting to have a good understanding of why IP address classes are pretty important. Let's just go ahead and get started into it. This might end up being a bit of a longer video. I want to try to keep this as concise as I can, but still give the basics of the information, so that if you're doing this for educational reasons, you just want to know it for the sake of knowing it. If you're trying to, of course, get certification, if you're already in the IT space, whatever it is, this information will be useful to you, at least at a foundational level, and then you can take it, from there in terms of more advanced information, or apply it in your personal or professional life. When you're talking about IP addresses, there are two types of IP addresses that we use in the modern day. You have IPv4 or Internet Protocol version 4 IP addresses. These are the type of IP addresses that we're more familiar with. These are the IP addresses that when you go into your phone settings, and you go into your network settings to check your IP address when you're connected to a Wi-Fi network, that number that's split into 4 parts, like 192.1.1. That whole thing, that's IPv4. IPv6 is the other version that was more recently created because IPv4 addresses are running low. So someone created a new protocol or a new standard for a different version of IP addresses. That way, a lot more IP addresses are available for different computer systems to use across the world. So to go ahead and get right into it, and we'll probably touch on IPv6 in a different video, maybe. I haven't decided yet. I don't know how relevant it really is to our just day-to-day living, unlike IPv4, which is like the standard that everyone uses right now. So if that's something you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments below. But in terms of IPv4, there are 5 classes of IPv4 addresses. They start at IPv4, or rather class A, and go down to class E. Now for this video, we're going to focus on the first 3 classes, A, B, and C, because those are the ones that actually, to my understanding, both in our personal and professional lives, more so our professional lives, actually carry some weight. Once I just briefly touch on classes D and E, you'll see why, at least in my opinion, I don't need to touch on those too much right now. They're not really as important. So we're going to focus on classes A through C. Those are the main classes to understand for educational purposes, especially because the differences between them are actually pretty minimal, at least by definition. There's more to them, but we're not going to deep dive into it. I haven't decided if that's something I want to do. So let's go ahead and get started. Normally, you would think I would start at class A and work my way up, or work my way down to class C. We're gonna flip on its head. I'm gonna start with class C and I'm gonna work up to class A. And I think this would work in either format, but in my opinion, this is a slightly better way of doing it to kind of get the idea across. Starting with class A, or rather class C IP addresses. Class C IP, or rather class C networks. You have class C IP addresses, but that also means you have class C networks. And class C networks are the most common type of computer network you'll run into. When you're just out and about and you're at a mall, a strip mall, a movie theater, a restaurant, Foot Locker, Foot Action, a designer store, whatever it is, and they have an in-store Wi-Fi network, that's most likely a class C network. If anything, I can guarantee it, because class C computer networks are specifically meant for the general public. You have 2 main factors, and let's go ahead and back up here for a second. When it comes to talking about these computer networks and IP address classes, there are 2 main factors to keep in mind. You have how common is this type of computer network out in the real world, and once you're in that network, how many devices can connect to that network. Class C computer networks are the most common type of computer networks you'll run into in the outside world as you're just out and about, but they also don't allow for that many devices to connect to them. So those are the 2 factors to take into consideration here. How common is that type of computer network? And by default, you should be able to get an idea of how many people can actually connect to that type of network. So again, Class C networks are the most common type of networks out in the world, but by definition, that means each individual network only allows so many people to connect to it at one time before there are no more IP addresses available to be used on that network. Another detail I want to cover, and this is where I want to go back into subnetting. So I'll definitely make sure I put this video up. So subnetting, you want to remember that subnetting essentially splits IPv4 IP addresses into two parts, kind of like an ID card. You have the part of the IP address that's used to identify, it's used to identify the computer network itself, which is called the network ID. Then you have the part of the IP address that is meant to identify the device itself, whether it's a phone, tablet, game system, and the like. That's called the host ID. Puts these two together and it retains that look of the original IPv4 IP address. But on the back end, once you get subnetting, once you include subnetting in the configuration of your computer network or the way that it's set up, those are the two factors that come into play when it comes to directing where and to traffic comes from. So if traffic is leaving your computer network, a combination of a network ID and a host ID is what's telling that data where to go. Same thing when it's coming in. So you want to keep that in mind. So the reason this is important is because network classes or IP address classes, they don't structure those IDs the same. You want to kind of keep this in mind, and it's very easy to identify or to keep in mind IPv4 IP addresses because of the number 4 in my mind. IPv4 means you're looking for 4 numbers. So if you have an IP address, whether it's 1.1.1.1, 192.0.0.0, 198.0.0.0, or any other combination, if you have 4 numbers as your IP address, that's by default an IPv4 IP address. So that number 4 is what will make it easy to identify. When it comes to Class C computer networks, they're the most common type of network that you'll run into the world, that you like when you're out in the world, you'll run into them the most. Each Class C computer network can only have up to 254 hosts or 254 devices that can connect to that network. Once that number has been reached, no more devices can connect to that network. From here, we're going to work our way up to Class B. This is for medium or large size corporations. These are the type of networks that they absolutely need a bit more devices to be able to connect to their computer networks because they have work to do. So they can't have as much of a limit to how many devices, cell phones, and any other things that can connect to their computer networks, because that might hinder them from doing their job. With that said, remember, Class C computer networks are the most common, but they allow for the least amount of devices to connect to their networks. Class B computer networks are in the middle. They allow, or rather they're not as common as Class C networks, but they also allow for a little more, well, actually a lot more devices to connect to their networks. In this case, where Class C networks allow up to 254 devices to connect to an individual network, Class B networks can have over 10,000. Actually, Class B networks can have up to 65,000 devices connect to their network all at one time without there being any hindrance to the performance of the network, assuming other factors are taken care of, quality of service and stuff like that. It's pretty much the same from here. So from here, it's easy. Once you have the foundation of it, and that's why I started with Class C, and you work your way up, Class B and A are easy. It's just a matter of scale or size. So when you go up to Class A networks, these are networks for very, very large corporations and organizations. Naturally, keeping that same structure between Class C and Class B networks, Class A networks are the least common, well, in terms of these three, they're the least common type of computer networks you'll run into. That also means they have the largest availability for people who actually can access those networks, which is not a common thing. Those are probably like conglomerate level organizations, international organizations that very few people should be able to access on a regular day in, day out basis. For Class A networks, up to 17 million devices can connect to a single Class A network at a single time. So again, the more common a certain type of network is, the less number of devices that can connect to it. The less common a certain type of network is, the more type of devices that can connect to it. This obviously places a highlight on security. So this is where cybersecurity folks on the technical side, it really behooves you to understand this concept, this basic concept. There's more to it, but that's just the basic foundation of it. Then you have classes D and E. This is going to be pretty quick. Class D actually contains information that I wish I used, that I wish I knew when I got my Security Plus, because I didn't understand this. It's kind of self-explanatory, but at the same time, you don't know what you don't know, right? Class C IP addresses are specifically for multicasting IP addresses. To define it, I don't want to just define multicasting. I want to define all type of casting when it comes to computer networks, and really just, I think, any type of networks, because even TV uses it. So there are three type of casts that you want to keep in mind. You have unicast, uni like one, so you have one-to-one. Unicasting is the type of casting you use when you're using like mirroring on your iPhone, and you're trying to mirror a video from Hulu or something like that to your TV or to your game system or things like that. Google Chrome, Google Casting is another version of that. When you're trying to send data from one particular device to one other particular device, it's a one-to-one relationship, so it's unicasting. The second one is multicasting. I'm trying not to say multitasking. Multicasting. This is a one-to-many relationship. Think of it like this. If you have a significant other and you guys are sharing intimate messages and things back and forth, the idea is you want that information to remain unicast. You want that to be from you to your partner and back again. You don't want anyone in there. Let's say if you mess around and you found out that you sent something a little spicy meant for your partner to a group chat, whether it's your friends, family, whatever, because I've heard of this happening. You just made a multicast. It was sent from you to multiple people, maybe even including your partner, but now a bunch of different people that it wasn't meant for have seen it. That's multicasting. You have a one-to-one relationship, that's you and your boo. You have multicasting, which is from you and other people that maybe, depending on your preference and line of work, you may or may not want other people to see. Then you have broadcasting, which essentially is like TV. This is to everybody, like anyone can see it. You know, certain TV stations and whatnot. You know, back in the day, Cartoon Network, we used to have the debate of what was Nickelodeon, what was Cartoon Network, and what was Disney Channel. I grew up on the West Coast, so for us, Nickelodeon was 47, Cartoon Network was 50, and Disney Channel was 52. So that's broadcasting, because even though on the West Coast the numbers are different than it would be here on the East Coast, that network, like Disney was still here, Cartoon Network was still here, Nickelodeon was still here. We were able to watch the same stuff, but you know, the network setup was different. So the channel numbers for you, depending on where you were at, are different. It's still a broadcast, because at the end of the day, everybody can see it. It just might be a little different depending on where you're located, but it's still a broadcast. I wanted to define those three types of casting, which is useful information to understand for tech talking. But Class D IP addresses or Class D networks are specifically meant for multicasting, meaning it's specifically meant for one device, for one computer system to send data to multiple places, not like everywhere, but to multiple places at the same time. Then you have Class E addresses, which when I looked it up, it literally said they're for research purposes only. So these type of IP addresses are probably addresses that they're currently like experimenting with. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if IPv6 IP addresses, before IPv6 became like a legitimate standard or protocol, would have been considered Class E IP addresses that they had to kind of experiment and make sure they worked properly before they made them available and known to the general public. Because if they didn't work and if they didn't play with it, then it would have introduced a whole bunch of security issues, you know, to organizations and the people that would use them. That's really all that is. Basically, in your personal, and I will also say, generally speaking, for your professional life, it's probably extremely unlikely you're ever going to touch a Class E IP address. That's probably for an extremely niche group of people. Class D IP addresses, again, generally, or rather very niched. Generally, most people in the personal as well as their professional lives shouldn't have to really touch them like that. For the general information, classes A, B, and C IP addresses or networks are the ones that you want to be familiar with. Those are the ones that, in my opinion, at least in the core of this video, that's the takeaway. Understand that Class C networks are the type of networks that are the most common in the world that we run into a lot, pretty much no matter where you go, but they limit the number of devices that can connect to their network, most likely partially for security purposes as well as performance purposes. Class B and Class A essentially, just kind of balance that pendulum a little bit as it goes up. Class C, most common in the world, least amount of devices. Class B, not as common, but more number of devices. Class A, least common, the most amount of devices. Millions of devices can connect to them at a time. I'll go ahead and wrap the video up there, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything like that, go ahead and leave that for me in the comment section below. Hopefully you took something good away from this. If there's deeper information about this topic that you think I should take time to dive into, go ahead and let me know that. Go ahead and let me know that as well. And I'll see you guys in the next one.